Hey, how's everyone going today? Say, today we're going to be talking about in our optimal programming for recovery course, we're going to be talking about the active recovery portion within the syllabus. So, obviously, you have seen just from previous lectures, we talked about last week, we talked about the passive recovery, and this week we're going to talk about the active recovery portion. So, next week, in the upcoming weeks, we're going to be talking about the different types of active, or not active, but the recovery modalities that can be used within programming to optimize, obviously, furthermore within recovery strategies and regeneration to restore the body. But today we're going to be talking about the active recovery. So it's a little bit more in depth of pretty much the tapering and the deloading that can obviously take place. As you know, Dane Bartz. I am a co-owner and director of coaching at Linked Fit. All right. So, what is optimal programming? When we think about obviously all these different types of things that we can think about, hopefully individuals are starting to think about what is recovery. So, what are the things that they can take, obviously, from your education that you're providing them? Because I've always said that everyone as a coach is an educator. You're a coach. You're a trainer. You're a performance specialist. You're a strength and conditioning coach. Whatever it may be, making sure that we're thinking about these different types of things and we can obviously optimize our programming further, because we know that obviously physiological and adaptations are going to occur, but we want to make sure that those are being impacted in positive ways. So, what is optimal programming? Optimal programming is definitely going to be categorized within a functional overreaching. Within programming, our outcome is able to eliminate any non-functional overreaching and get rid of any types of symptoms of overtraining, because obviously there's research that shows myoglobin is released within the bloodstream, creatine kinase obviously is produced within the bloodstream, and these types of physiological biomarkers are able to show that obviously we're hitting these spots, and if something needs to be taken advantage of and take a next step into our training, these are going to help out. And obviously they're going to be into a lab setting. I know that there's some companies that utilize this within their programming. If you have that money, if you have that support, definitely utilize it. But it's really about non-functional overreaching, functional overreaching, and eliminating any type of production of overtraining symptoms. So who needs this type of programming? Who's the one that pretty much fits the needs of this type of programming within active recovery? And to be truthful, it's anybody. It's any type of athlete. It's any type of general population, special population. Because if you're definitely going through a training program, hopefully we're training through these different types of energy systems. We're hitting our high intensity training variations. We're hitting our intermediate training variations, and then you're going to hit your low intensity training variations. So it's like obviously our muscles are made to produce very, very high intensity demands, and all of a sudden we're able to produce something that we can obviously last for the course of an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. Our body can obviously do amazing and astonishing things, but it's just what we really put the program towards, and obviously what we're training for. So when we think about obviously an Olympic weightlifter, they're really going to go through two different pretty much lifts. They're going to go through a snatch using a barbell, and they're obviously going to go through a clean and jerk, which is this right here. That very high impact training, individuals are really trying to, within a tournament, the individual or that athlete is trying to produce a PR. So they're trying to hit a personal record for the clean and the jerk, and obviously even the snatch. So they're trying to get those numbers up so that they obviously can win the tournament and beat obviously their competitors. So you can imagine obviously that they're definitely at a high intense training. So when we do obviously aiming for our tournaments, we want to make sure that we're taking these appropriate steps within our phases, that we can obviously hit these, like obviously you're at a preparatory period, and think about what we can do as our active recovery. What are the things that we can obviously do within our programming? They're not necessarily not training. It could be the case, but what are the things that an Olympic weightlifter would do within the programming to make it efficient for them? Soccer. I mean, soccer is a great sport when we think about the demands that they do. A very multi-directional sport, a lot of pivoting, cutting, sprint variations are always on the go. So oxidatively, we want to make sure that they're fitting those demands. And games can be scheduled within 24 hours. They could be scheduled within 48 hours. It's not going to be necessarily hit today, but the end of the session recovery is huge. And after what they're doing in their games, or after what they're doing within even their training programs that a coach or a trainer is obviously developing for them, is something that needs to be efficient, and it needs to be optimal. And you'll hear me say optimal a lot within our discussion, because I believe that there is an optimal way of training for any type of individual that we're working with. A pitcher, pitcher of Justin Verlander here recently just won a championship, and thinking about how much pitching that this individuals are going to go through within the start of the season all the way into the end of the season. If they make the playoffs and they go to that, they win that championship, then that they're playing longer than what the typical athlete's going to be playing for in the MLB. So obviously a lot of impact on the throwing on the arm, that shoulder capsule. So making sure that they're taking the appropriate steps within their training, and even obviously any types of high intensity training that they are doing, making sure that they're potentially taking some weeks off from that so that they can develop further adaptations and positive adaptations. Basketball is one of those sports. When we think about it, they're going through a lot of mechanics of jumping. So landing mechanics is huge, but what they're doing in the off season, in season is definitely a little bit more complicated, because these athletes can definitely go back to back 3 times. They could be a Monday and then a Tuesday and a Wednesday. I mean, that is the rigors of their sport. So we need to think about that within the programming, because it's really hard to train athletes when they're obviously going through these types of these schedules, and that needs to be definitely introduced to a different type of stimulus, so that obviously we can hit that type of compensation within biology. Powerlifting. Powerlifting's a very good sport within obviously a lot of volume, very high intensity. So thinking about those different types of things, you might go through a 3-week progression of some linear periodization, and undulating, whatever the case may be, that as a coach thinks that's going to be optimal for that individual. And I think every type of custom or program should be customized. So thinking about squats, thinking about obviously our primary lifts, our bench press and our deadlift, what are we going to do within that 4th week, that 5th week? Say if you are doing a 7th week deload, what are the things that you're going to be doing? And that's what we're going to hit today. Tennis is one of those, very multi-directional sport, very short field of play, but let's think about the things that they need to be doing within those sessions. Sometimes obviously they're going to have very, very long games, but what are they doing obviously within the training that has obviously taken place from tournament to tournament? Very high impact sports such as football and even boxing, very big hits that obviously can take place. Overall, just total body things that can happen. Things that can happen within even concussion rates are big within these 2 sports. So deload is very, very important for them. Rowing's a good one. Gymnastics is a good one. Lacrosse, dancing. Dancing, they're obviously going through all these different types of bodily motions and landing mechanics. And these landing mechanics can be within a single leg variation, a double leg variation. Sometimes, when we think about landing mechanics, their feet could be straight, and all of a sudden now their feet are going to be turned out, because that's just the way that that dance move is carried over for them or instructed. Bodybuilding, going through very very isolated types of work. It's a sport that obviously looks at symmetry within the body, but think about what their body is going through in a stressful and a fatigue factor up to their tournament. Mr. Olympia is a very, very big one. And think about what they need to do after that tournament. Maybe they're not going right back into high intensity training. They just cut 50 pounds, 20 pounds, 30 pounds, and to pretty much lean out, as you could tell. And, what are the things that we can do to make sure that as a strength specialist or a personal trainer that we're developing for them to make those appropriate steps so that we're not obviously fatiguing their body out even more. General populations, that's why I put this in here. So you got that fitness enthusiast. As you're in charge of their program, you have your big group of individuals. You got your one individual that you're training one-on-one. And if we just keep training at high intensities the whole entire time, obviously our body's going to get to that overtraining variation. I mean, rhabdomyolysis is a big one, and we don't want that to happen. So optimal programming for active recovery should be integrated within any type of program. So within the content of today, we're going to talk about our active recovery. That's obviously the big component of today. Last week we talked about our passive recovery. We talked about our sleep. We talked about our nutrition. So within those impacts of like what is recommended for sleep, within the three macronutrients, you got your protein, your carbohydrates, and your fat. Obviously when we think about post-training, what are those different types of grams that we should be taking in per kilogram of body weight, but also even daily total, because I mean, recovery is always happening all the time. Our body's obviously going through these micro tears and these different types of things, but what about training? And that's what we're going to talk about today. Like, programming is obviously huge. When we get into our programming portion of today's lecture, it's going to be about like examples. So I'm going to show you things that I've done in the past with training individuals and coaching my individuals, and also the data that we can obviously utilize to make sure that we're like, hey, like this is what's going to track and this is what we're going to need to monitor this athlete, so that if we need obviously to take an active recovery, or because their sleep is a little bit different, we might have to take a redirect day, or it might have to be an off day. So recovery modalities, I mean, from those two different components, obviously we talked about this last week, passive recovery, but today's big component is going to be about our active recovery today. So make sure that, obviously we're taking notes. My big thing about obviously educating you guys, my students, is to make sure that obviously you can start integrating this into your programming immediately right after. I mean, changing up your program. You learn something today and you're like, you know what, that's what I want to do. That's something that I pretty much want to carry over. So active recovery, what do you program? There's obviously a system. When we think about NSCA guidelines, the needs analysis is what is needed for obviously, injury status of the individual, the level status of training that this individual has gone through in the past. Have they've had any type of anatomy structures, surgeries, or anything? What are their goals? What is their movement analysis when we look at sport? What is their movement analysis and movement screening and then movement assessments if they're restricted? So obviously all these different types of variables can change the way that we're going to program. So all these different things, you kind of put them in your toolbox. You think about that athlete, going through that consultation and what's going to be best for them. But we know that if we just keep training at a high value, their body is just going to break down. So let's make sure that we're programming efficiently for them so that it's going to carry over in that long run. Because I mean, obviously when we think about it, that long-term athletic development or that long-term performance development is going to be what's best for them. So active recovery, the big component of today is going to be the deload. So when we talk about deload, big component is going to be volume. So we want to reduce that volume that's taking in. So that might be reps that we're going to be doing. It might be the sets that they're actually going to be reducing as well. Intensity. So say that you've been training this individual at roughly, we'll say 85%. So potentially within a repetition maximum, that's going to be about 6. But for this deload, you're in that 6 week, let's think about reducing it down. Maybe it's 50%, maybe it's dropping it down by 10% or 15. If we think about obviously the volume, more than likely if you're reducing the amount of sets, duration is also going to be reduced as well. So obviously those go hand to hand, but within a deload, let's think about our volume, let's think about our intensity, let's think about our duration. And these two ones up here, you're gonna see is obviously offload. You're gonna see the redirect, and the big thing, obviously, you think about offload. It's pretty self-explanatory. It's offloading. So you're you're not actually doing anything with the body. You're actually, it might be a day that someone comes in and your athlete's just, or your client is just like, hey, I've actually, I didn't get any sleep last night. Yesterday I actually didn't really eat anything. Um, I'm just really stressed out. Going through some fights going with friends and everything. Obviously life is life, and we hit some different circumstances, and we as a coach need to monitor that and make sure that we're obviously seeing that. Because I mean, if you think about those different types of things, stressful impacts are obviously going to even produce lower numbers with an HRV. So if an HRV is obviously lower or lower, we can think about the nervous system, and an autonomic nervous system is now going to be impacted because of that. So our sympathetic nervous system's on sky alert. It's like fight or flight, and that's the stuff that we don't want to do. We want to make sure that someone's just ready for training, because if their nervous system's shot, what do you think it's going to do to obviously their training status? And those things we need to obviously think about, and just make sure that we are researching these things. And if you have any questions on any of this type of stuff, reach out to me. I would be happy to have a meeting with you about this redirecting. So something that I've definitely done a good amount within my coaching is redirecting the day. So it could be that someone that just kind of came in, and I use that example literally about 10 to 15, 20 seconds ago. And someone came in, they're tired, they slept, but it wasn't the greatest quality, because obviously quality is a big thing on that. You guys remember that off of our passive. Passive is obviously a big thing of that, and we might have to redirect their program. They've been eating right, their stress level, they're not stressed. It's just, they're tired. And, obviously that's going to make a big impact on what we should be doing, is redirecting it. So it's just taking a day that, you had a plan on that Tuesday. You're like, you know what? Today was actually supposed to be like a big day of lifting, but you know what we're going to do? We're going to change this program up. We're not going to do. We're actually going to go off of the book a little bit. Programs are great, but sometimes it's just things need to be changed, and we understand that last minute it's going to be needed. So try to make it as custom for that individual as you can when it is appropriate. So to recap, deload, talking about volume, talking about intensity, duration reduction, offload, totally eliminating any type of chance of training that day, and redirecting and giving them another thing that they could be doing within that session. So let's think about our actually programming layout. So now we're going to talk about our macro cycles. So looking at the whole year. So this could be anybody. Looking at you have the opportunity to train this individual for a year. Depending on what you do as a personal trainer, you might get them into a year program. And you're like, you know what? Hey, this is what we're going to be doing. We're going to obviously think about the year ahead of us. And we're starting off in January, New Year's resolution. But it could be November. Be like, hey, we're going to do some good training. Obviously, there's going to be a recovery within, but you're going to see that in the next set, or the next slide is talking about November. So November would be like, hey, this is the day that, or this is the month that we're actually we're gonna take 30 days. Dude, we're still gonna train. I'm not gonna stop training you, but we're gonna take some time off. We've been hitting the weights pretty hard. My programming is definitely something that I think about, and that November we're gonna kind of maybe go into some recreational sports. We're gonna play basketball. We're still gonna train. We're gonna do a lot of like balance work that time, but taking some time just to recover the body, and then leading back into it in December. So think about mesocycle. Now we're thinking about like the months that are put forward. On this one, you can see obviously within the month of January, we're training the whole month of January. It's 4 weeks, but then all of a sudden we get into February, and now we're getting into our first week and our second week of February. But all of a sudden now that 7th week comes up and there's a recovery. So this could be something that could be anywhere from 6 weeks out, it could be 3 weeks out, and needs to be integrated in appropriate fashion because of what the training program has integrated. And from there, you obviously look back into it the 4th week, February. So it's thinking about the months in hand. When are we going to kind of do those recovery weeks that are from the training stimulus? Because obviously it's at a high demand, and we need to take that deload week. Still training though. That's the big thing I want to prioritize today, is make sure that we're educating our clients that it's not necessarily we're not stop training. We're just taking time off to recover the body, get the muscle tissue to repair itself, replenish the amount of glycogen, get the blood flow going, get the circulation. So training, and obviously every 6 weeks in this example, they're taking a recovery week. microcycle. So now we're actually looking at that training week. So Monday all the way through Thursday, they're going through training, and all of a sudden from there, Friday, they have that day off. Then all of a sudden now we're looking at potentially a game. So this is obviously, you could see, is an example for an athlete that they're going into a game on Saturday, or it could even be that recreational athlete that you have coming in that, they're trying to lose weight, they're still want to train with you, but every Saturday they go out with their buddies and they're playing a game, a pickup game with a tournament or a whole bunch of friends of theirs. And then Sunday, it's a complete rest day. So it's kind of like that offload day. They're taking time to obviously spend time with family, friends, making sure that they're obviously paying attention to nutrition, get that protein intake going on, and make sure that obviously they get good sleep. And then you're picking up where you left off on Monday. But this is obviously something that you can do. This can be changed and modified. In the past, I've always done training such as Monday and Tuesday is training, and then all of a sudden Wednesday is that recovery day. Thursday and Friday is where we're going to do our training again, and then Sunday and Saturday is those rest days. If they want to do something, promote that activity, but depending on what you feel is appropriate for your individuals, let's program upon that. So active recovery, here's the bread and the butter of today's discussion. So deload, big thing that we want to do is obviously reduce that volume. Research has supported anywhere from a 40 to a 60% decrease. It does not have to be that, but we want to make sure that they're obviously getting a appropriate break from that high intensity training. So reducing it down to 40 to 60% could be beneficial for that individual. Reducing the intensity now by 10 to 30%. So say if you were down at now 100% of your repetition maximum, you're at 100% of your intensity rate. Now obviously we're going down to 70%. So we're taking that week off, still still training, but now you're just going to 70%, maybe hitting your 8 repetitions from there. And we'll get a little bit more into detail about training from here and how to program this. Reduce duration. So say if they were going into 6 sets, now we're obviously going to go down and decrease the volume to 50%. So now they're going to 3 sets. You just reduce the duration right there in the program. So it's pretty easy, obviously, to reduce the duration. You don't want to add more. Obviously, you could do some other types of recovery modalities that could be integrated at the end of the session, which is something that we're going to be discussing in further lectures and plan. This could be planned after about 3 to 8 weeks. Say if this individual is going through very, very high intensity training for 3 weeks, that is that Olympic weightlifting, and they came up to you, they're only 12 weeks out and they want to start training. Boom, there we go. So we know we have to think about it a little bit differently now. And now they're going through high intensity training for 3 weeks, definitely lifting up some heavy weights. Then you take that week off. But depending on what you're going for, this deload can be done anywhere from 1 to 30 days. So kind of thinking about a minor deload. A minor deload can be anywhere from 1 to 5 days, maybe 7 days. And then a intermediate deload can be a like 5, 7, 8, maybe 10 days off. And then from there, now we're getting into like that major deload. So now they could be like 30 days off. It could be 20 days off, depending on obviously what this individual is going through. What do we think about a macro cycle? Is a macro cycle. We just said that they're going to go through a deload within the whole month of November. So let's think about that. And depending on obviously what they've been going through the whole entire year, we have to program optimally for that. So the benefits, obviously when we think about benefits, it's a big thing is increasing the blood flow. So I'm still trying to train them and just getting obviously all that nutritional uptake into there, the byproduct removal. Obviously, recovery is important and movement is important for that. So we want to keep the body going. We want to keep the muscles actually going through some demands. We want to make sure the nervous system is actually still going through its appropriate steps. Nutrition is obviously a big one as well. So making sure protein's obviously taking a big uptake on that. Carbohydrates, replenishing that glycogen. And then obviously fat's obviously important for that as well, just because we know that obviously what fat can do is fat's going to be a hormonal response. Decrease lactate, decrease fatigue, I wish I would have capitalized this fatigue, because that's a big component, is reducing the amount of fatigue that's going in the body, and reducing the stress as well. So from here, we're going to talk about a study by Kautz and others in 2017. Pretty much what it looked at. It looked at a 6 weeks of overload training, and then from 6 weeks, they obviously went into a post-training taper. So they're tapering for that 1 week, deloading, and it showed the significant impact it had on VO2 max and even vertical jump. So now we're actually looking at like the physiological adaptations that occur, but then even the performance as well. So obviously we can even categorize as vertical jump as a performance measure. So when we look at it, we're looking at our pretty much VO2 max. You know, in the pre-training, we did, obviously in the study, they did a baseline measure testing of 51.9. From there, post-training, obviously you go through a catabolic state. Obviously you're going catabolic and anabolic, but they're breaking down that muscle tissue, they're breaking down that body, they're fatiguing it out, and it's going to go through go to a now 47.9 on that VO2 max. Then they went into a deload. So after that 6 week, they took a taper and they went into a deload, and all of a sudden now you can see after that deload week, it went to 54.5. Doesn't seem that big, but that's a significant approach to look at. So let's make sure that, you know, we're looking at those types of things, that it's obviously making changes to the physiological adaptations, and VO2 is being supported by that. So vertical jump, now we're looking at performance. So when we look at vertical jump, we're thinking about a pre-training of 63.7, post-training went to 61.1, so it went down. And then now all of a sudden they took that deload week, that taper, and it went to 65.1. Boom, there we go again. Significant difference obviously within that measurement. So a vertical jump went up, and that's what we want to obviously look at from there. So programming. Programming is obviously a big portion of what we do within our training. And let's think about obviously what this individual is going to be doing within weeks 1 all the way up to weeks 6 and 7. This is an individual that I have trained in the past. So this is a real live program that has been experienced by the individual. Very, very elite athlete that this was. I definitely put this athlete through some high intensity training. And what we did after that is they went into the 7th week, they went into a deload week. So obviously they're starting with 4 sets, and all of a sudden they go into 5, then they go to 6, 6, 6, and then they go to 7, 7 from there. So obviously you see that primary portion, that green, this whole entire area here was some primary lifts, such as like a sumo deadlift, and obviously even some upper body push with obviously the incline chest press. But from there they went into a deload. So as you see, you know, my whole goal was to recalculate the max, drop it down by 50% from the 100%. They were going into some high training. They did 7 sets of 6 repetitions. This individual could handle that. So it's like, I know that some might not agree with that type of programming, but that this individual could handle it, and I wouldn't program otherwise if they couldn't. So recalculating that, obviously that within their sumo deadlift, they went into a drop down of 50% from that 100%. My goal was here is now I'm trying to actually reduce, or not reduce, but I'm just having them rep it out. So they went from 6 repetitions, and now they're reducing it down to 50% of that intensity rate, and now they're just repping it out. So they might get 15 repetitions. It's a more endurance place of training, getting that blood circulation, removal of the byproduct from there as well, and obviously promoting that anabolic effect. And then from there you can see the same thing in the incline chest press. Obviously a little bit harder to obviously make some calculations off of that, but dropping it down by 50%, doing the same thing. So when we look at pretty much the deload, since I've reduced this individual to 4 sets and they're repping it out, just because of the sets, that's how I calculated it, they reduced their volume by 42%. And then from there, they reduced the intensity by 50. And that was already pretty much explained right here, the 50% from 100%. The reps, obviously, their goal is just to rep it out. I have explained to this individual when I did program them, I said, hey, once you start to get a little bit of fatigue, you know, you might get 5 more repetitions, call it on that. You know, and I explained to them it's a deload week. I'm not trying to crush you. I'm actually trying to just get some further adaptation so that next week we can get after it. Reduce duration. So obviously we know that 7 sets, it's going to take a lot longer than what it is going to be for 4. lighter weight. And then this was planned after 6 weeks, and it was a 1 week taper. So even though you're looking at this program here, this program was just 1 day, and this individual was going through four days of training, and this was just planned after that 1 week. So they had 4 other days of deload that they were thinking about. And obviously, I've had some plans for even their Wednesday. I had plans for their Saturday, and Sunday was that offload. So that day off, that is kind of recovery day, complete rest. So check for learning. What I want you to do is I want you to develop a 4-day deload training week for a general population, or your choice. If you want to do an athlete, that is absolutely fine. But within that, I want you to include reductions in intensity, volume, and also duration. So when you do this, kind of think about why you're doing this. You've had a 6-week program. Feel free to use other programs that you have in the past and to kind of just add another week to it. And you're like, hey, now let's add that deload. Think about it, put some rationale behind it. What's the reason why you're doing this? Because some athletes or some clients are going to ask that, so make sure that you're prepared. So pause the video, do a check for learning, and let's develop that 4-day deload training week. All right, so redirect. Redirect is obviously the way that the individual comes up to you. They're not feeling that great. They're not necessarily sick. It's just they're stressed out. So let's just take a different day of training that day, and we're going to do a redirection. So still doing a primary portion to it. Obviously mini bands. I'm a big fan of Turkish get-ups. It's just one thing that I've always liked to do. It's obviously big on just body awareness and getting that individual to think about where their foot's at when they're doing that leg sweep. Making sure they get proper hip extension. Make sure that they're focusing on the shoulder, and make sure it's always pointing towards that ceiling. So something that I do, it's like 2 to 3 sets, so it's not necessarily going through full force using a whole bunch of load. It's just getting some proper mobility and stability within that shoulder. But you'll see a little bit more about this in the upcoming lectures. Is massage, flexibility training, some mobility techniques that we could do, as you see, doing some foam rolling for the adductors. And then from there, if you look at the amount of sets that we're only doing 2. So they might get a light little sweat going on, but my whole goal is not to crush them. It's just, let's just take a redirect way of doing things today, and still get some movement going on within the body. Conditioning, secondary thing is now it's just going to a slow, long distance conditioning, zone 1 to zone 2. 20 minutes is what I programmed or integrated into this, and it's 50 to 60% of the heart rate. And the end of the session, so we'll get a little bit into this, but we'll get a little bit more into the whys and how to program them into further lectures. But as the end of session, so massage, flexibility, mobility. Obviously, you could see some distraction techniques that we can utilize for that hip capsule, and I'll explain to you what that is if you don't know already. We'll get a little bit more into detail about that in upcoming lectures. Hydrotherapy, big thing on that, so let's use that appropriately if we can. So check for learning again. I want you now to develop a 1-day redirect training. You can just do the active and the conditioning portion if you want to. It's your program, so think about what the rationale is going to be, and it could be for a general population client. But I want you to include that rationale on why you selected the movements that you did. What the repetitions were, why the volume that you end up doing, the volume, the intensity of what you did. But redirection, and we'll go from there. So pause the video, and we'll think about that. So data. So now we're thinking about tracking and monitoring different types of stimulus that can obviously take about. So this can be done with surveys. There's some sort of softwares out there that you can utilize. I think a great thing that you can use is like Google Forms. There's even obviously some designing software programming technology that you can use that actually has that built into it. But HRV is something that's good. Obviously you can look at the parasympathetic nervous system versus the sympathetic nervous system. So HRV is obviously big on that. Whoop, Omega Wave, Elite HRV, stress and fatigue. So how are we going to think about if we need to take an offload versus a redirect day? Thinking about how that's affecting the stress levels and fatigue. So it's like when we know that we're getting into a very, very high workloads, which now you can see is the next one. It's going to impact that fatigue rate, variation, because we're looking at session RPE times that duration. So the longer that you work out, the higher that number is going to be, but the higher that your intensity is going to be, obviously the workload is going to be up. So retest and test is what, or test and retest as well. So vertical jump and velocity. There's some research that supports the differences of if an individual is actually fully recovered from the previous session by looking at vertical jump, and if there's that little bit of a percentage difference, which research has shown that, if I remember correctly, I think it's 33.5% in a difference, or maybe 5%, that individual's not ready in a readiness scale to move forward into the program. So there's a redirect day. Maybe it's kind of going into a deload. You're not necessarily where you should be at. So different things that I have used in surveys is, what day of the week is it? How much sleep did you get from the previous night? How would you rate your level of fatigue? How would you rate your level of stress today? How would you rate your muscle soreness and tightness today? So obviously, if we know that we went into a very, very high impact session, which we will see after this one, right? How would you feel after today's training session? Looking at that session RPE, their soreness might be higher definitely on that next day. So how did you enjoy your training session? I think this one's big. I think it's definitely overlooked within the industry. And we want to make sure that your clients are enjoying the training sessions, making sure that they're laughing, making sure they're having a good time, and enjoying the time that they're coaching, getting coached by you. This is obviously what the outcomes can look like. You could see obviously the muscle soreness is something that's always going to kind of go up and down. If you look at the level of stress, hopefully it's something that goes down, but you know that life's going to sometimes hit you in different spots that we don't want it, so hopefully stress is going down. Workload is obviously going to make some different types of variations into that as well, and obviously fatigue is potentially going to make some up and downs as well, because hopefully your training program is getting them fatigued out a little bit, so you'll definitely see some linear up and down, different types of scales. So check for learning again. This is the last one. So from here, I want you to from the tracking and monitoring variables listed previously, what variable would you like to track and monitor? So, and why would you do that? So if it was stress and fatigue, how are you gonna to monitor that? Are you gonna use a survey? Are you gonna ask them in the training session? Are you gonna text them? Is it gonna be an email exchange? Like, what are the things that you're gonna do with your athlete and your client to track different types of stimulus that we could do, so that we can obviously take a redirection, or if we need to take a deload week, because if it wasn't planned and it was planned for the next week, I'm gonna have to take it this week. Think about that, track and monitor variable, pause the video, and think about why you're gonna do that and how you're gonna do it. So what's next for my recovery? Hopefully clients are thinking about this. Think about what you're gonna do for your clients, and how you're gonna think about the next approach for their recovery strategy. Think about these different types of active recovery strategies that we can use. Our deload, reductions in volume, intensity, duration, if it needs to be redirected into a different path, if it obviously may even need to take an offloads get some complete rest. So important, kind of our key points of today. Recovery is a key component of programming and should be included, obviously passive and active. So active, looking at our deload, looking at our redirection, obviously offload. Educate your clients and athletes on the why. Why are you doing this? You're not trying to destroy them. You're trying to help them and make them perform better and get to their results, or get to their goals sooner. Listen to your clients and athletes' experiences and modify if it's needed. So if they came in and they just had a stressful day, and you can even see that on the tracking and monitoring is that you've been doing, and modify if it's definitely needed. So take it easy and enjoy the rest